Good evening, everybody. Today is Monday, December 3rd, and this is a Moscow City Council meeting. Brandy?
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Brandy. We'll move on to item number 1, which is our consent agenda.
I would make a motion to accept the consent agenda with the removal of item E onto the regular agenda, please.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion by Brandy and a second by Catherine to approve the consent agenda with the exception of item 1E for further discussion. We'll start the roll with Ann.
Aye.
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 Okay, Brandy, you have the floor.
Great. So I just took a look at the administrative committee meeting and heard Gary acknowledge that the rent agreement, the dollar per square foot, was pretty consistent with market rates, which is my understanding as well. There was just didn't happen to be a discussion of the escalation that was built into it. And so I just wanted to know if that was something that was looked at and what your opinion is on that 5-year escalation.
Yes, certainly. We checked standard rates downtown. $1 a square foot is pretty much a standard rate for a downtown office building. I discussed with Bill Belknap previous to this meeting and when we were negotiating the lease. 3% is what the city typically puts in our contracts for personal services. The idea is to keep it at a rate with inflation. It depends on the lease that you have with different landlords. In this case, the landlord wanted an escalator so that it was a building that she had just purchased. She wanted to make sure that the lease was at least keeping up with inflation. So she requested 3%, and because it's standard in our own agreements, that's what we said we would bring forward to council.
And in what page of the lease is it?
That would be under rent and payments, and sorry, I wasn't prepared for the exact.
Packet, page 40.
Which one? Page 40?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, packet, page 40.
Page 4 of 17 of the lease agreement.
Okay. Thank you. Got it.
Yeah, it's
Mark
called
down.
out, the individual monthly leases are called out under section 6.6.
Yeah, and
That
actually,
includes the
yeah,
escalator.
it would go slightly down each year as a percentage because it's a fixed increase each year of $50. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's not exactly 3%. We came to a rounded number so that we had a round number for a rent payment.
Very good.
Further discussion on item 1E.
Nope, that's good. That was my one question. Thank you.
I would entertain a motion from somebody to approve that then.
I move we approve section 1E.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion by Art and a second by Gina to approve section item 1E on the consent agenda. I'll start the roll with Brandy.
Aye.
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 Okay, now we will move on to item number 2, which is a staff recognition report. Gary Reedner, do we have anything before us this evening?
We do, sir. Had to walk across twice for dramatic effect.
That's okay, we can all use the exercise, it's a good thing, Gary.
Especially me.
I'm not saying that.
We're here to recognize tonight the City of Moscow Fleet Department. I'd like to introduce Tyler Palmer, who is our Deputy Director of Operations for Public Works, to recognize the Fleet Department for an award they received from Government Fleet Magazine. Tyler.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this is one that's of particular importance for us because our fleet supervisor, Rick Benjamin, who's been with the city for 3 decades, is retiring. And so Rick and his department have won this award now 3 times. It's a big honor. The Government Fleet magazine and the American Public Works Association have this program to recognize what they say is the Leading Fleet program recognizes fleet operations that are leading the industry in innovations, ideas, and the way they face challenges. The purpose of the award is to drive industry toward thinking about lean fleet leaders. It recognizes those who are working to change their own fleets and their industry for the better, those who are thinking beyond the status quo. The really neat part about this is of the cities that were recognized in this program, we are certainly one of the smallest. You know, by and large, it's big cities with lots of resources, and as usual, Moscow punches above its weight with these kind of things, and our fleet department under Rick's leadership has really done some innovative things. We have our Eco Driver program where we've actually seen a decrease in fuel consumption when most cities are seeing an increase. Through active management, we've really combined a lot of use on vehicles. We specify the most efficient vehicles and really take sustainability seriously as we go through our fleet operations. We were seeing about 4% increase per year, and we've seen a significant decrease over the last several years. And so it's really an honor to be here to present Rick with this award. Rick's the kind of public servant that if I ever grow up, I want to grow up to be like Rick. He really takes his public service seriously. It's something that he's committed to the residents of Moscow and always has that inform his decisions as what's best for the residents of the city of Moscow. So with that, we'll like to have Rick Benjamin come up.
Hello, Rick.
Hi.
So do you want to do the picture first or ever?
Yeah, we do the picture first,
All right.
and with comments.
Let's get you.
Perfect.
Gary's getting better today. He got the first one. Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
I don't have anything to say.
Thanks for the positive spirit.
It's a pleasure to win this award. We, in Fleet, aren't one that, we're kind of a behind-the-scenes part of the city, and to actually be recognized for things that nobody really notices is pretty special. My tenure with the city has been a great ride, and it's nice to have this kind of recognition, so thank you all.
Don't run off yet, Rick. I'm going to brag a little bit on you. Rick, as you see, is a very modest person, and he just gets things done. And that's the significance. We got lots of employees in the city that does that, and Rick is a total example of that. This Eco Driver system that we have been working on for like 6 or 7 years, and the fuel reduction is a big deal for us. And through the innovative operations that you guys have had out there, it's been wonderful. This city has saved money year over year ever since I've been the mayor, maybe perhaps before that. But it also, the emissions, carbon emissions, the less of that, and the things that we're doing as a city. And we can be pretty proud of a city of 25,000. It's kind of fun being able to be around bigger cities that ask us how we go about doing it, and that's a big deal. So, Rick, hats off to you, and I just wanted to brag on you a little bit.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate that.
Your Honor, if I may, for a point of clarification, I forgot to mention that due to some comments, feedback from the council, the minutes were adjusted tonight. They were passed out, and I just wanted to make sure that those replaced the current minutes that were voted upon. So if we could just get a consensus from the council that the minutes as amended, as presented, were actually the minutes that were being approved in the consent agenda.
My assumption that we were voting on the amended minutes.
Mine as well.
Okay.
As mine was too.
So that's a
I'm the one
consensus
that-
of the council?
I think everybody is good on it,
Thank you very
Gary.
much.
And you okay with it?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, Gary, did you have any other staff recognition?
No, sir, I do not.
Okay, very good. Okay, we will move on to item number 3, which is mayor's appointments, and I have none this evening. So we will move on to item number 4, public comment and mayor's response period. This is a time where we allow folks to speak to us and give us their name and their address and give them 3 minutes. And as long as it's something that is not on tonight's agenda or something that is in front of planning and zoning and/or the Board of Adjustment, please come up, state your name, address, and let us know what's on your mind.
Hello, my name is Kent Salisbury. I'm living over at the Sojourners Alliance Men's Center, 627 North Van Buren. And I just recent transplant from Idaho Falls to look for work up this way, and I noticed my first impression of the downtown area. I saw lots of trash on the street, and I thought, well, I might pick up some trash to help out and talk to Art here when he had returned from his travels on November 26th. Told him about my concern, how it would beautify the city to pick up some of the debris and the cigarette litter. And just by the end of the week, after I had talked to Art, I had already seen a difference. He mentioned he would work with the Chamber of Commerce to address the issue with the business owners. And I thought it would be important to bring it up to the city council, maybe put forth some effort to sweep more around the streets, encourage the business owners, encourage the public to put their trash in the proper receptacle. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Ken.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else like to come forward? Okay, well, with that, we'll move on to item number 5, Palouse Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And Gary will be presenting and announcing some. Sure, go ahead. Gina will be a part of this presentation too, so she will be down there assisting Gary with others.
Actually, Your Honor, I'm just the eye candy to introduce the item. Tonight, we have the Partnership for Economic Prosperity, who is leading the effort in the Palouse Housing Assessment. A presentation was given to Administrative Committee about a month and a half ago. Gina is the Executive Director of the Palouse Partnership for Economic Prosperity. We've had a few of these. Paul Kimmel is here as well. He's a board member of the PEP group as well. I serve as Secretary Treasurer of that organization on behalf of the city. So without further ado, I will turn this over to Gina and Paul for their presentation, and it's all yours.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I have to say that every time I answer the phone, too. Partnership for, it's, and you can't really shorten it. PEP doesn't make sense to anybody. So anyway, can I get a quick primer on how to work this, please? So PEP was formed 3 years ago, and we were formed with the concept of partnership and transparency. And so the way that it, that's going to be a fun presentation for me.
Branching out.
Well, we'll do that next.
Wow, it's taken 2 of them.
Is it in the presentations?
It's the only one on there.
That means I saved it in the wrong folder.
You got another spot on there, Lori?
Check the 19th.
I'll leave it to you, buddy.
Okay.
Thank you, Gary.
Check the 17th.
Oh, yeah, that may be.
Hold on a moment. Sorry.
Okay, that's nerve-wracking. I can't get into the updrive. Oh, you can't get to my email.
I'm gonna-
It's in This is really helping me
I
be
am
less nervous,
so,
I'm just
so
going to
sorry.
say. It's really,
Do
it's
you need a
calming.
glass of water or
I might
anything
need
up
somebody to
there?
hold my hand. You're not volunteering, that's okay. Okay. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about PEP. So again, first of all, I'm Gina Terusio. I've got a different hat on tonight than you normally see, but during my day job, I actually work for the Partnership for Economic Prosperity. And we were formed about 3 years ago as an organization that believes that economic development in Latah County is important. And that means in Moscow, in Deary, in Troy, in any of the outlying regions, because what's good for one community in our county raises all ships. Okay, so we're built along that concept. The partners are the university, the city, the Chamber of Commerce, University, City, Chamber of Commerce, and the counties. So we're all on equal footing. So I've spent my first, coming up on 2 years, out in the communities and really listening to them, trying to see what it is that they need, what they don't need, what keeps them up at night. And I've started to hear the same refrain. Didn't matter which community, it was just the same kind of answers. First of all, broadband. We need more broadband. We need better broadband. We need broadband at all. Because if you go into Kendrick, sometimes the phone stops working, and it's just it's a strange world. You'd have to go back to the dial phone. But anyway, it was broadband, it was workforce, and specifically workforce or even a differently trained workforce. There's a group of workforce out there that realizes that they need to do some retraining. And then also housing. And it ranged from affordable housing to actual just housing in general. So, hold on a sec. Awesome, thank you very much. This one, perfect. Okay, so that brings us here tonight. So that refrain of broadband, workforce, and housing brought us to kind of where we were early January of last year. And we started to recognize that there were also some nationwide trends happening. If you are watching some of the, like the World Economic Forum and that sort of thing, housing keeps coming back up. And there are a lot of communities that are trying to deal with affordable housing and housing in general right now. So I want to bring to your attention tonight, kind of part of our decision-making process, 2 key reports. The first of which was put out by the United Way last year. Is that correct? That talks about housing for ALICE families. ALICE is an acronym for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. Okay? So essentially, they're finding that housing, which should only be about 30% or less of your income of a family's income, is becoming more and more and more of a burden on income and actually increasing. And it can be a function of geography, economics, and in some places zoning laws can prevent some of this affordable housing being put out there and put together. And then as a result of some of this asset limited, income constrained situation, the whole economy of the community suffers because nobody has any extra money to spend on the extra things. Well, and sometimes not even the extra things. It can also be food, or electricity, that sort of thing. September 20th, we were lucky enough to have Bobby Joe Muehlman, who is our Department of Commerce director, here at the IDA conference at MZ. And she actually shared that one of her top 3 initiatives for her time in her directorship is housing and affordable housing, addressing the issues that she too hears in basically the same role as me, being out and about, talking to the businesses, finding out what they need. Housing is a big one. You have a trouble growing if you can't recruit new people and have them live someplace. So, on the next slide, the second report that I want to bring to your attention is the Out of Reach report, and that's put out by the J.P. Morgan Chase Company. And this is specific to Idaho. Housing costs are too great for a majority of Gem State residents. And again, this says very similar to what the Alice study says, but that it puts a little bit of a finer point on who these asset-limited people are, these workers. These are bank tellers, childcare workers, preschool teachers, restaurant servers, nursing assistants. These are the people, the bulk of our workforce here in Latah County is who they're talking about. This is real. The need is real. And again, I will say that, with this situation, businesses are finding housing affordability limiting their ability to grow. So it is a very serious and very real problem. I want to highlight a couple pages, a couple of reports on this out of reach study. First of all is the Idaho information. Now, they ran these reports for all of the 50 states. Basically, what I want to draw your attention to, and I'm going to try and kind of squint and read it too, that with the minimum wage at $7.25 an hour, a regular individual would have to work 85 hours per week to be able to afford a 2-bedroom rented house. Okay? Right below that is the number of jobs that same person would be required to have in order to rent that same 2-bedroom house. So they'd need 2.1 jobs to be able to afford that here. In order to afford a 1-bedroom rental home, again, 66 hours and 1.6 jobs. So it isn't possible on one income to have even a rental home in Idaho. Again, for Washington, as I share this information, notice it's a slight bit different, $26.87 per hour would be the wage needed to afford these houses. It's definitely skewed by the larger metro areas in Washington. So, but again, the average individual working at $11.50 an hour in Washington would need to work 93 hours to be able to afford a 2-bedroom home rental. So pertinent, very serious information, and I wanted to give you Washington as well, because as a region, Moscow and Pullman share a workforce. If you look at that, we pull from the same pool, okay? So this affects our region. So who are the stakeholders in this study? Who are these people that are affected? And there's a list. Every single one of us, from education to municipalities, to the counties, to private business like Avista, Gritman Medical Center, Pullman Regional Hospital, Schweitzer, everybody. The entire region is affected by this need. And I want to highlight both ends of the spectrum in this group. So there are the asset-limited, income-constrained demographic. There are definitely those bank tellers and those people that struggle to make ends meet on the wages and with the housing prices that they are. But then there's also the other end of that spectrum. These are the people such as the Schweitzer Engineering and the universities who are struggling to recruit individuals who would maybe not necessarily be concerned with the lower end of the housing spectrum, but also maybe the $300,000 or $400,000 or $500,000 homes. It's very difficult to hire a level of, say, a dean or a provost if you don't have houses that they would be interested in living in. So I want to bring back into focus that we are looking at a housing needs assessment that includes both affordable housing and higher end housing for all of the workforce that we would have in our two communities. Okay, so the need was there, the need's real. We began to look around to see who our experts were. We looked locally. There weren't any experts that had an expertise in housing as much as Thomas P. Miller and Associates. And I am going to take this opportunity to introduce to you Brian Points. He is their Director of Research. He is our main contact. I won't say ringleader because that makes it sound far too easy. But Brian will come up and explain the study to you, and then I'll be back up in a little bit.
Thanks, Gina. So I'll first say a few words about myself and about our company, and then we can talk more about the scope of this project. Thomas P. Miller and Associates was founded over 30 years ago in Indianapolis, Indiana. Tom Miller is our president and CEO, still active in the company. He was previously the Secretary of Workforce Development for the state of Indiana. And after doing that job for a number of years, decided to kind of open up his own consulting organization. And since that time, we've been growing, focusing on specifically on community, economic, and workforce development. All three of those issues kind of merged together. We have roughly 40 employees, most of them in the Midwest. I'm definitely the furthest spread out into the West. That's one of the benefits that I think we bring to this analysis is that we have a range of experts. That's in fact what attracted me to the company to start with. Which, getting back to my side of the story, I've lived in Moscow for the better part of 14 years. Has not always been easy to do that. I live here because I love Moscow, and my family and I have made sacrifices and choices in order to do that. But in that process, I previously was working for EMSI for a number of years, and then I moved to Indiana about 3 years ago to work for this company because I really appreciated the expertise that they had on these issues, and I wanted to do more consulting like this, more work like this. So since that time, I've moved back where I now work remotely for that company. So I feel that we're bringing you really, I think, probably the best of both worlds in that I am a locally, reside locally. I live in Moscow, but I also have a backup of a lot of experts back at our home office. And you have our slogan here, which is thoughtful solutions, empowered communities. Our intent with all of our projects is to bring data, stakeholder engagement, best practices, analysis to the table for our clients to really equip them to make changes. That's our goal is all about impacting communities in positive ways, and we play a role in that, but we also recognize that we are a partner, bringing ideas to the table, equipping our clients, partnering with our clients, but we pass that off to them because the implementation is in their hands, and the same is going to be true in this case. Here's a little bit about our experience. I won't dwell on any of this stuff too long, but just to get a sense for what we do. We've worked in 42 states, as you can see, all across the country, from North Carolina to Indiana to Maryland to California and to Virginia. And the example of clients that I have on this list, everything on this list has something to do with real estate, usually with residential real estate. Our work frequently touches on that topic. To use one of the best examples here, the project we did for Du Bois County in southern Indiana. It's a medium-sized county in southern Indiana, right along the Kentucky border. But we did a workforce housing assessment. Help them understand, much like in this situation, what's your housing stock, what's driving it, where are your gaps. And I'll talk about that project here again in a few minutes as an example of what can happen if you deal with this issue kind of responsibly, get ahead of it, and have results as an effect of it. The elements of our study are listed here, we're really already in the thick of this. We've been working on this for a number of months already. We haven't gone too deep into all the elements of the scope of work, but project launch is really our way of saying we want to understand what the client's need is, and we want to study all of the material that they already know about, including the strategic plans, regional plans, things like that. Desktop research is building upon that, and we've already delivered a document showing here's our perception of all of this previous research and how housing kind of ties into all of it. Quantifying supply, we want to understand what the housing stock is in terms of bedrooms, detached, undetached, duplexes, what rental units versus single-family housing, like what is actually out there. What are the growth patterns? What are the rental rates? What are the costs of that housing? All of that stuff goes into our quantification of supply. Quantifying demand is about understanding more about the residents, their their jobs, their demographics, their commuting patterns, the in-migration patterns, things like that. Point 5, stakeholder engagement, very important to any project, this one being no exception to that. I like to say that if you try to understand a region just by doing data analysis, that's like thinking that you watched a football game just by looking at the box score. It's not the story. That's not really what's going on. You actually have to talk to people, and we're going to put a lot of time and effort into that, including one-on-one interviews, focus groups with residents in rural and urban areas on the Palouse, major employers. As Gina mentioned, this is a huge issue for economic development because employers often struggle to get people to come to an area because of the lack of affordable housing. So major employers, the public servants, key stakeholders, nonprofits. We have a list of, I can't remember how many, I want to say it's 40 to 60 people, something like that, already on our list that we want to talk to in some capacity. Evaluation of existing inventory is a further kind of qualitative aspect of our study. It's where we're going to assess not just the the numbers, but what's really going on with those houses. I mean, do they look nice from the outside? Are they stylistically up to par? Is it are there certain factors that are less easy to put into a spreadsheet that we ought to be aware of? And then lastly, analysis and diagnosis is putting all this stuff together in our final reporting, which will be easier to explain in this next slide for outcomes. So what we want to provide for Latah County and Whitman County is quantitative analysis, which I've explained, summary of stakeholder engagement, and then getting down from there the things that are more, here's what this means and here's what to do next, best practices. So one of the benefits we get from working across the country, currently I have projects in Oregon, Wyoming, Texas, I can't even remember, lots of different places, but the same things are being talked about everywhere and people are approaching it at different angles. So different styles of solutions, different combinations of partners, and we can bring those best ideas to all of you, things that have been successful in the past and things that are being pioneered right now. Gap analysis, what's missing in that current housing stock, and obviously what are some options for you to augment that, to supplement that. Benchmarking to comparable communities, it's often helpful to know, again, for the sake of looking for good ideas. If there's other places across the country similar to you, do they have a similar proportion of renters? Do they have a similar cost of housing? Do they have better infrastructure or worse infrastructure? Anything that we can find out about those places. And then finally, our recommendations for improvement. We don't have a slide on this in particular, but I'll just note that timeline-wise, we started in earnest in September of this year, and we started working on a few of those initial elements. Things have gotten protracted a little bit because of the holidays. The stakeholder engagement stuff is a little difficult to do when everybody's thinking about Christmas and Thanksgiving, that kind of thing. And then we'll head into January and throughout the spring, we're seeking to complete the project in its entirety by the time college spring semester is out. So in May, sometime mid-May. Here's a quick slide that I think you all will find interesting, because I think one of the natural questions that one would ask based on this is, we already know this is a problem. Why do we need to spend this time, proving that it's a problem? Yeah, you do know that it's a problem, but one thing that we've seen and we've learned from other communities is that just speculation about that or a rough guess about that's not sufficient to actually affect change. Understand the problem, understand so that you can figure out what is a reasonable solution. There are only so many, when the cost of housing is high, there's only so many things that can be done to bend that cost curve down, right? But if you don't know exactly what those different elements are, you don't know how to do that. And in the process of doing analyses like this, you also get the right collection of community leaders and experts together who can do something about it. So here's just a list of 4 examples where we've seen this work. And I intentionally tried to get here a mixture of multifamily, single-family, manufactured housing, and different places in the United States. So Du Bois County, the project that we did a few years ago, I mentioned earlier, since that time, they've constructed over 200 affordable units, and there's another 686 units in progress. So by any measure, that we're not claiming credit for that, but there is a cause and effect there of helping our client think through the problem. In Jackson County, Iowa, this is a single-family solution, a combination of the Realtors Board and the county and a housing trust have gotten together to make this pocket neighborhood, to bring that cost down to $150,000 per unit, which is really incredible. Orcas Island area, very close geographically to where we're at. Their study has led them to receive $6 million in grants to develop a multifamily complex on that island. And then this last one, which I think is interesting, obviously a lot of places in Appalachia struggle with the worst problems that our country is facing in terms of joblessness and drug abuse and affordability and that kind of thing. So there's a group down there that's working on getting together all of these really dilapidated, outdated mobile homes and replacing those with units, very high density, 800,000 square foot units that for people to live in. So just a collection of a few things that happen as a result of really bearing down on this issue. So with that, we'll go to questions, and the questions can be directed at me, Paul, or Gina, depending on what the type of question is.
Questions from the council? Catherine?
Thank you. This is very helpful from the last time that we had a chance to talk, so I appreciate this a lot. And I went back into the PEP document, and I just wanted to let you know that I did find that on, I'm not sure, 16 of 17 talks about strategies and tactics, and it talks about the comprehensive housing analysis. So I just wanted you to know that I appreciate that it was in the document. But I do have a question about in the Du Bois, well, that's the one you're bringing up, is similar to us.
Yep.
And you then showed the slide that had what you all did and then the partners that became part of the solution.
Right.
When you give your analysis, do you also give some examples like they changed their zoning laws, they went to the subdivision ordinances and changed those things? Is that the kind of thing that you put into the?
Yes. Yeah. When it comes to the benchmarking, we want to get as deep as we can, and there are going to be cases where the information isn't really available. If it's not written down somewhere, and if somebody's not willing to share that with you, well then, there you go.
What do you mean?
Well, in cases that we can do our best to reach out to people, but sometimes people just don't want to really share that much information. So best practice we'll share what we can find about the situation, but I can't say that we'll know absolutely the whole story in every case. It's just, from a consultant standpoint, people often don't see the benefit in talking to you, and I don't blame them for for thinking that, honestly, if you're not working for them. So, we get whatever information we can.
Okay, I just have a follow-up question, if that's okay. And it had to do with when you were talking about in task 6, and where you're doing all the qualitative information gathering.
Mm-hmm.
And hold on just a second. Because that's the evaluation of existing inventory.
Right.
And I liked that you were talking about all the different types of houses that you see. And then you started to mention actually the quality of the housing. So when you looked at units, if they were in poor condition, they were assessed, and all that would have to be done to them to get them to be at a certain level to have other people move in, or?
Yeah. Do you want to say something?
Well, it's and I've heard our Vista representative mention this a couple times, but it is, I remember back to my days as a single mom trying to make ends meet. Housing can also be unaffordable because it's not energy efficient. You're spending an inordinate amount of your income paying for electricity or paying for natural gas. So yes, those are those qualitative pieces that we will be taking into account. So absolutely.
Okay, great.
So that's a perfect example, Gina. The other things that we'll be looking at there include in comparison to, say, other neighborhoods that are constructed in other places in the United States, what kind of amenities, or if we're talking about multifamily, same thing, what kind of amenities are offered in that community? How close is it to a bus route? Is it stylistically appealing to a modern eye? Is it appealing to a younger audience? Is it appealing to an older audience? Do we have the diversity of housing stock? So things like that, that's the kind of stuff that we're going to be looking at. And we'll develop one of the things we need to do when we get into the spring is develop a more precise rubric about what exact things we want to look for and how are we going to grade that. Because it is always tricky to kind of take qualitative things and then turn them into numbers, but that's what we'll be doing.
And I just have one more follow-up, if that's okay. And it had to do with the stakeholders. And so you're using them as part of your inventory gathering, and then who that you get to be part of the results in terms of making things happen? Like the list that you gave with the people that began to do those things, how did you get them into action?
Go ahead and talk about it.
What was that?
Go ahead and talk about it. So that's the list you're talking about?
So the process, so this is the list of, stakeholders that we engaged with very early in the process. We also had a brainstorming session where we figured out who else do we need to include in this. That, it's not a pay-to-play scenario. It's not anything like that. It's if you're important to this community, or if your perspective is important to this community, you've got to be included in this. So that's, developing that whole list, which includes, real estate developers, realtors, employers, HR people across the board from the entire region. So we did our best to really look out as much as possible, and we're open to including others as well.
But in the results part too?
Yeah, I mean, their perspectives are part of the data. In a sense, it's not as if somebody says, well, I need, a $40 million development in my backyard or I'm going to leave. It's not like we're going to make that a recommendation. But we hear them out, we distill all that information, and we kind of look for common themes, much like you would in a survey. So everybody's opinion has weight, but it's kind of balanced with the rest of the information. Does that answer your question?
It totally answers my question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jim?
A question in your list of projects that you've worked on before that are in our proximity, like the Orcas Island one. Recently in Donnelly, which is in central Idaho, south of McCall, they just put in a pretty substantial affordable housing project there, and I don't know how that was financed or how that came about, but it seems like it would be very similar to the situation we have here, and maybe we could tap that.
I'll write that down. I wanted to add something to your statement or your question earlier. It is the wish of the Partnership for Economic Prosperity that this study inform decision makers and inform decision makers who can change or adjust policy that would allow better and more affordable housing, period. That's the goal of it all.
Well, one of the things that comes to my mind is availability of units, and that's one thing we lack in a huge way in Moscow. For example, if you go back through the entire year and look, you've ranged from 20 to 25 houses available for sale in the city of Moscow, and that's for this entire year. So what that does is it forces pricing up on all housing, because those folks that cannot get into a house, then they go to an apartment or apartment complex or whatever, and it's a spiral of pushing prices higher. And that is an issue in a number of places, not just Moscow, because the supply of housing in America is very weak, and it was because of what happened 10 to 12 years ago about the glut that they had and the complete financial collapse of that. And it goes right into construction workers and developers that are just scared beyond belief about going too far out on a limb to build stuff because of what happened to them in 2006 through 2009. And so that is something that needs to be faced, not only in this community, but communities abroad across the United States, in my view. So that is, what you're looking at is a supply and demand thing to me. I always made a comment, somebody asked me, well, how do you get houses cheaper? I said, to have somebody build 200 of them. You'd have cheaper houses, but the problem is, that's pretty easy to say, but who are you going to get to do it? That's the catch, and that's a $64,000 question. And in addition to that, these houses that are being built that run from 2,400 to 3,600, which is an average size house now, and I'm not talking about a real big house, developers are very, very reluctant to build anything smaller than that because of the cost factor. It takes almost the same amount of time to build a 1,500 square foot house as it does a 3,000. But they make a lot more money on a 3,000 square foot house. And so how do we fix that? It seems to me like that is what we're going to have to be able to solve, to move forward with, if we're really serious about it. Now, how do we do that? I've got no idea, but that seems to be like a very valid point that we have here. Brandy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about, I would like a better understanding of the connection between having all this information compiled, the assessment. So, I mean, I know some of this is out there in different forms, like the inventory. I'm sure the realtors could provide that, or the, what was that report? The out of reach report. You know, we have some information in these different places. So there must be some gaps that you are working to identify, and how will identifying those help to work towards the solutions? You know, I know that we all know there are problems, and I understand saying they need to be better quantified, but how would better quantifying them actually provide a return on that investment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's, I think, where benchmarking and best practices becomes particularly important, because you all identify, this is a national issue. A lot of it has to do with the cost of land and the cost of construction, like tough things to say, we're going to make that cheaper, right? So that's where you have to, figure out, can this be done cheaper through modular building? Can this be, can you develop housing that is, I can't remember what this is called, but there's a particular style where you actually leave part of the house unfinished so people can, grow into it with time, so you're not paying for the finishes in every level of the house. Smaller square footage, research is showing that people are valuing that less than they used to, and they're valuing, kind of the community amenities and the outdoor amenities more. So those are all things that start to bring that marginal cost down. And there's good examples of that, which we hope to bring to you all.
And I think those are the kinds of things that I would be very motivated to invest in, looking into those different options that are out there and what could work in this community. It's just not clear to me what we're missing in the assessment part to help us move to that ultimate solution phase.
Okay. From a quantification kind of standpoint, there's a lot of research done on the issue, and there's kind of national reports like the one that we showed the slide for earlier, but it's a fair amount of effort to get the right things in the right place to really tell the whole story. So, this is not, it's not the sort of thing where you have to create data that doesn't exist, right? It is the case that you have to research it to get it all together to kind of tell the story. And it's not easy, for example, to find what percentage of Latah County is rent burdened beyond 30%, beyond 40% of their income. Like those should be, you would think, it's not that hard of a stat to find, but it actually is kind of a hard stat to find. So just because nobody puts the data together in that particular way, right? And that's why we're doing that type of analysis.
And so then to kind of expand on that, so having the data together in one place in this format, what would then that help you to be able to do? Having that all together in this concise, really clear, here's the whole picture. How is it that it can help you to get grants? It can help advise the city of zoning suggestions?
All of that, yeah, everything. I mean, Or there's also cases of, are there people that didn't, in the community who previously weren't aware, who weren't participating in this issue, who could help out in some way with land or with expertise, or, in some of these cases that I showed, it's just as simple as, somebody giving free architectural design plans, right? Anything to just shrink it down, minimize costs. And there are grants available through a variety of organizations. The state is doing some things, but there's never been, in my 10 years of doing this type of work, there's never been a case where a grant-making organization, a federal, a state organization gives somebody money because they're like, we think this is a problem. You've got to have an assessment of some sort to, really tell that story.
Okay.
I have one more that's probably for Gina. So at this point, the consultant's work would be done. Let's say this whole assessment, once it's all finished and you have this, what will PEP do with this?
PEP will help lead some of these actions. So is it a grant? Do we want to research grants? Is it maybe working with the real estate developers? And I would never do this in a vacuum. I would go with my friends at the city and deal with real estate developers and help them understand that one of the findings was potentially that this is a good way to do things. We are the communicators of solutions in this moment. So we would help decision makers implement change that would allow some of these gaps to be filled. How's that? Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. You guys want to add anything? Okay.
Art,
Paul,
did you have
Oh, just more of a comment than anything else, I suppose, but I'm glad to see that there are local feet on the ground on this study. Mm-hmm. And also, Brandy has hit on it, but I'm keenly interested in having actionable conclusions, because in the city, we've done study after study just to find out that, yep, you got a problem. But I want to see things at the end, and it sounds like all the tools are there, but to utilize some of the results of other communities and areas to provide some really actionable recommendations that we can undertake to improve the situation of housing.
Duly noted.
So, Paul Kimmel with the Avista Corporation and member of PEP. To answer Brandy's question, maybe in a little more wider view, it's really about, and this study really gives us a more sophisticated understanding of the problem. It brings all those different pieces together, from potentially rent burdening, from qualitative information, quantitative, and it brings it for the region so we can have a more sophisticated understanding and solutions to the problem. And that's what we've lacked. I've been around this community for a long time, worked in economic development a long time, and I have never seen us address holistically the housing issue. We've gone at pieces. We have fair and affordable, and we do good things. Habitat. We address pieces of it, whether it's sojourners and some of our other challenges. But this is really, as I work in many communities, we serve over 200 communities of various sizes. Housing is the issue. It continues to drive our communities. It's difficult for them to afford housing. It's difficult when they live in substandard housing to pay their energy bills. And we've got to start addressing it. And so the actionable items out of this study will be a burden on all of you, and we expect it to be so. And we will challenge you. We will hold you accountable, as well as ourselves, that we will give you ideas. We will challenge you to say, you know what, we need to figure this out for our developers, because they're going to continue to build 3,000 square foot homes because they know they can get a rate of return on that. They're not going to build 1,500 square foot homes unless they know there is some assurance that the city will work with them on zoning and setbacks and densities. You know, we're going to have to build smaller. We're going to have to build more energy efficient. And, you know, my company is talking about this. We're looking at opportunities to partner on projects across our footprint. So, Jim, to get back to the Donnelly question, my understanding is that was mostly about workforce housing issues, that, you know, in a community like Valley County, where you have so many in the hospitality industry, those are some of those 70% wage earners that live below that $15 an hour wage, and they continue to get pushed out of McCall and get pushed out of Donley and Council and everything else. They just have to go further away to live. They're starting to address their workforce issue. We have that even going on now with some of our university employees, even our city, county. I mean, if we ask some of the people that work in this building, Schweitzer Engineering, we're pushing out some of their workforce out into communities 30, 40, 50 miles away. We're asking to drive in, more burden on transportation, a less suitable housing, higher energy costs. It's not what we want to do. I think we have a responsibility, and as we've said in our proposal, it's really a regional imperative. So, with that said, I'd ask you, and I've been, well, since January, when Brian approached me, and I've been sort of mulling over our housing and how might we start addressing this, not only in Moscow and in the Palouse, but across our service area in 5 states. You know, what do? We have to start with good information, as I say, a sophisticated understanding. And this really, so Brian and I got talking, and we talked with our PEP board, and it's like, yeah, we need to address this. It impacts everything from homelessness to high-end. It impacts our workforce, our communities. And so we put this proposal together. We've been out talking to our other major funders, the University of Idaho, Washington State University, City of Pullman, and Schweitzer Engineering. They've all committed at the same level we're asking you tonight. So we're asking you tonight, and Avista Corporation as well. We're asking you tonight to consider supporting this study at $10,000.
Yeah, Paul, I got a comment I want to make about, and because I made this about, a developer wants to build a 3,000 square foot house instead of a 1,500 square foot house. And I got friends that are developers that have been in the business and so on and so forth. And I wasn't picking on them, maybe because of our regulations or setbacks and other things. As a stakeholder, these developers got to be a part of it. What would it take to get you guys to build a 1,200 to 1,500 square foot house? And maybe they say, well, God, if we could change this or that, because maybe as a city, and a bunch of us as cities, maybe we're putting too much regulation in the way we're doing things. You know, we love pathways, we like bike trails, we like all these different things. We like pocket parks and parks in every single development. And maybe we need to take a look at a little bit of a different approach to some of those things. I'm not suggesting that, but those are the people. Why aren't they doing it? There's got to be a reason for it, maybe more than what I'm saying. So
that's exactly what we'll be asking.
They're going to come up with a
Absolutely.
solution. It's not going to be a solution of a government agency figuring it out, because it's about a free capitalistic enterprise as well. Okay, what's it take so you guys that are building these things to make a fair living yourself, but we can get people into these houses? It seems to me like that's a reasonable thing to think about.
We just haven't had the hard conversation, honestly. You know, we've been comfortable in how our neighborhoods are developed, our setbacks, our big wide streets and low densities. And I think we have to start having better conversations.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And I think sometimes we fall in love with our ideas, and what we forget is, hey, maybe there's a newer idea or a change to that idea that would be a little bit better solution to what we're trying to accomplish. But we need to find out, and we need to peel the scab off the wound, for crying out loud, and get the blood oozing so we can figure the thing out and make a solution to it. Because this has been a problem. When I first came here to Moscow in 1977, there was 3 houses for sale. 3. And I had to commute from Lewiston for a year and a half before I could find one, and I found one through a private party to buy, because there was nothing available in my price range. It was just amazing. And so that's been a little bit of an issue in the city of Moscow, in my view, for a long, long time. So here we are 40 plus years later, and we still have a similar issue, and it's an issue in a lot of other places as well. But anyway, I get a little fired up about talking about that. Catherine?
That's right. In the funding commitment category, and I definitely would like to support you, I know that we always end up going to the public entities, and I'm just looking at the list of stakeholders and supporters. I mean, is it reasonable or to ask the
Yes, and we have, yes.
Yeah.
And we have some commitment from the development community.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. That's great. I'm glad.
Well, what you do,
I would love more skin in the game. You know, the challenge in, as you all know, in an economy like this, we have a lot of public sector. And, you know, our major employers are universities,
Right.
cities, school districts, you know, with the exception of Schweitzer, you know, in the hospitals. So, yeah, unfortunately, unlike other communities, our private sector industries aren't quite as robust.
Right, yeah.
So,
Thank you.
so yes, unfortunately, we do have to go to our public entities
Yeah.
for support. But rest assured, there will be some truly important findings out of this and some good outcomes. Because I'm not gonna go away on this one. I've been at this too long. I'm getting a little impatient in my old age. Maybe. Don't say anything, Mrs. Kimmel.
Well, with that being said too, Paul, perhaps we can really get down into finding real facts about what it is we need to fix.
Yeah, I think we'll have, I think what I hope to do, and like we always break down a lot of our outcomes, short-term, long-term, what can we do today? What are those easy fixes? Is it density? Is it just, well, we need to figure out how to incentivize more development at this level, at this scale? Do we encourage more planned unit development? I mean, you know, and your community development department is, you know, superb. So this is not an indictment, nor is it intended to be.
Well,
It's like, no, we look forward to working with them because
Paul.
they see it too.
this isn't a knock about anybody, whether it be the city, or whether it be the developers, or whether it's our community development, or whether it's an institute. It's about solving a problem we need to fix. I mean, if you really look at it in a broad sense, you look at the statistics in Seattle, you gotta make $36 an hour. That's $75,000 a year in order to rent a 2-bedroom apartment. That, ladies and gentlemen, is nuts in my view. And so that's why, I mean, you can see, and I'm philosophizing a little bit, but geez, you went right back to that tax thing that they were going to try to impose on Amazon to try to help their homeless. Well, they got people that are homeless that have got 2 jobs that cannot live in a house of any kind. And so we need to be able to fix the situation before it becomes that way in every community over a certain populace.
There are 44 million households in the United States that rent. Of that, 40% are rent burdened as we speak right now. So let's just assume that same. And if you look at the Alice report, and I brought copies for you all,
Yep.
and we've talked about that, but you know, over 50% of our workforce is considered Alice. So I think it's the time.
So I have a question for Gary, I guess, would be probably the resident expert on this. I'm in favor of supporting this from a budgetary standpoint. Is this in our budget for this year, or where are we getting the funds for this?
Yeah, we put it in the appropriation. We have $25,000 in professional services in non-departmental. So it is, we budgeted it, you approved the budget, appropriated the monies, and now you're just approving the request. But
I
it
just
is
couldn't
in the
remember
budget.
as a specific line item in the budget, so thank you.
We do that, pretty much in all of our budgets, Jim, in order to have a little flex for something like this or a nature like this. Council has a little bit of flexibility in how they spend that money.
Right.
I would just make a comment. I'm really encouraged by the more stress on the outcomes and the benchmarks and the solutions, and I'm really happy to hear that that's a important part of what this assessment will be, and that it won't end when the assessment is done. And I hope that it keeps trucking forward with that information that you get from this report to make something happen.
I agree with you. I think that what Gina said, so I guess in holding you accountable, I like what you said, where you said, you know, you're going to be the communicator of the solutions. That's what you see PEP is doing. And that means, in my view, you know, of these things, is that you're at the P&Z meetings and you're talking to the developers and you're going back down to Deary and you're having hard conversations with the people down there. I mean, that to me is how we then have to push once we have consolidated all this information, you know.
That is our commitment to our stakeholders, and I think you understand what I do for a living more now.
I do, yes, and thank you for the presentation. With that, I would like to move to approve the financial participation in the Palouse Regional Housing Needs Assessment in the amount of $10,000.
Your Honor, I will need to recuse myself from this vote because it affects me directly.
Well, we better see if we get a second.
Oh, sorry.
I will second.
I'm just trying to be careful.
You don't want to cut it off, you almost took the time limit. I'm only kidding you,
For
Jim.
God's sakes.
Okay, Jim made a second, Catherine made a motion, Jim made a second to approve the financial participation in the Palouse Regional Housing Needs Assessment in an amount of $10,000. We all clear on that? I'll start the roll with you, Brandy.
Aye.
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 Okay, you got it, so we can move on, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for that report. You know, these candid conversations about like this sort of thing is a very needed thing in our communities. Every single one of our communities, we need to talk about stuff like this. We need to get a room full of everybody that's a stakeholder and hammer out some kind of solution. And I hope that's what we find out and what this report is. And this would be a great venue right here in this room. Thank you, everybody that participated in that. Now we'll move on to item number 6, which is Stormwater Phase 2 Draft Permit. Tyler Palmer is presenting this evening. Tyler, how are you again?
Doing well, Mayor, thank you. Good job. All right, if you'll humor me for just a second while I get this pulled up.
We know it's on there. We've seen it. Evidence that it's on there, Tyler.
Brian, isn't he?
Yeah.
Call the city of Donlin.
Yeah, I agree with that.
How'd they do that? Because it's a nice building.
There's
We know
ways.
before we leave council.
I hope to make this at least in part as entertaining as what we just had.
What are you saying, Mr. Palmer?
I'm saying that was amazing. I'm really excited about that. Okay.
You need help, Tyler?
I might. I think we've got it.
Lori, can you find that for me? You had it up there once. Huh? We need your help.
Folder.
Huh?
Pretty sure it's in the folder.
That's just not even
She
funny.
was just,
Oh, there we go. Okay, I got it. Yeah. All right. We had to start with something maybe slightly more entertaining.
Hello, Jerry. Oh, Jerry, stop!
Who's that? What are you doing down there?
I was about to offer you a balloon, but you're raking leaves in my face. Knock it off. Last week, your leaves clogged a pipe and flooded half the street.
The flood was my fault?
Yes, the city had to come clear your blockage before the water could flow to Paradise Creek.
This goes to the creek? I thought all the sewers went to the city's water reclamation and reuse facility for treatment.
No, storm sewers carry water directly to local streams. Paradise Creek is already impaired by too much phosphorus and nitrogen. And leaves make the problem worse, and don't even get me started on your dog waste. Only rain down the drain. You want your leaves back?
I'm not supposed to take things from strangers.
I thought Ty just only did fog.
Oh, no. He's an actor, too.
Now he's in the acting business.
Oh, my goodness.
So,
Actually, looks pretty good.
Gary always likes to say that we try and do more with less here in Moscow, and that's true there. We have Mike Dimmick, our water production supervisor, who starred as our clown, and Zach, who helps with our...
So that was Mike down
That
in
was
the
Mike.
drain? Oh.
Well, he wasn't actually in a drain, but he did some creative cinematography for that one. We're here to talk about stormwater, and specifically the Stormwater Phase 2 permit. This is something that we actually really are excited to be talking about. It's been in the works for a long time, our Phase 2 permit, and today what we hope to do is just brief the council and on what's happening, where we're at, where we've been, and just give some history on what it is that's going on. The Clean Water Act is what started the process for the stormwater Phase 1 and Phase 2 permitting. The reason that this is really important for municipalities is that cities and urban areas generate a lot of the pollutants that end up in our waterways. I showed this video, and it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's an informative video that we created to try and help educate our residents. It's amazing how many people think that the storm drains go through the sewer treatment plant. They think that it's treated, and very few people realize that that directly flows into our creeks, which directly flows into our rivers and in all of our waterways, our lakes. And so it's terribly important when you think about the activities of a city that we have a good program in place to make sure that we have good, clean stormwater runoff. And so that is part of what the Phase 2 permitting does, is that it makes sure that municipalities have a program in place to assure that we have good best management practices to deal with our stormwater runoff. And that's the process that we're going through right now, is our permitting process for stormwater. Currently, stormwater is managed through our streets department. It's just kind of a tack-on thing. We don't have a lot of resources to manage it, and so we have a decent inventory of what pipes we have out there, but it's not something that we're able to do a lot of monitoring, we're not able to be proactive, I guess is the best way to put it. It's a very reactive thing. When something plugs, we go and we unplug it. We have our sweeping to try and keep a lot of the debris out of the street and things that could flow into the storm. But through the Phase 2 process, as we'll go through, it'll become a lot more intense and regulated. There'll be a lot more things that we're able to do. And so I've asked Kyle Steele, who oversees our environmental services group, and the environmental services group will be one of the primary groups that oversees this program. I've asked Kyle to come and give you all a briefing on what Phase 2 means and what it's going to mean for us.
Welcome, Kyle.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. No clowns were harmed filming that. I just wanted to get that out there. It is a disclaimer at the end, but we didn't make it through there. So,
Forward, back,
laser. Yeah, like Tyler said, I'm here tonight just to give a real quick primer on the Phase 2 draft, the stormwater regulations, where we've been with EPA over the last decade or so. I guess it's been since 2007 we've been talking about this, and then a little bit about what the permit entails. So a little bit of background. The Federal Water Pollution Control Act, also known as the Clean Water Act, was signed into law back in 1972. And if you remember kind of what was going on back in the late 60s, we had, for example, the Cuyahoga River caught fire. So we had a lot of significant environmental issues going on at the time, which resulted in a lot of the statutes that you see that are in place today. The goal of the Clean Water Act is to not only restore but maintain the biological, chemical, and physical integrity of the nation's water. So waters like Paradise Creek up to the Columbia or Mississippi River. A very important component of the act, the regulatory framework, is the NPDES program, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination Program. And what that does, that program, it regulates the discharge of pollutants from point sources. So, for example, like from our wastewater treatment plant, discrete pipes, and the important part of that is that those discharges are permitted, and so they contain certain permit limitations and conditions and stuff like that. So up until about 1990, the primary focus of the Clean Water Act was really on wastewater discharges. There wasn't really any focus on stormwater. So in 1990, EPA promulgated the Phase 1 stormwater regulations, which really focused on medium and large municipalities, so a population, greater than 1,000. It also looked to regulate construction activities that disturbed, that were part of disturbance greater than 5 acres. And they started to focus on industrial activities as well. In 1999, EPA again promulgated stormwater regulation, but the focus was on small MS4s, and those MS4s in urbanized areas. And an urbanized area was classified at that time to be, a city of 50,000 or more, so like the Lewis-Clark Valley. At that time, they also reduced the disturbance threshold from 5 acres down to 1, and the rule also gave EPA, as the permitting authority, discretion to designate municipalities that were outside of those urban areas. So this is pretty important. This is kind of where we fit in. That designation criteria consisted of, is the population greater than 10,000? Is the population density greater than 1,000 per square mile? Does the municipality discharge to sensitive water bodies? Do they contribute to, or could they cause to contribute to violation of water quality standards? And so in 2007, the city was notified by EPA that we were a potential candidate for regulation. And I think that was in July or August of 2007. About the same time in 2008, the city received notice from EPA Region 10 that they plan to designate the city of Moscow as a regulated small MS4. And in that notice, they requested that the city make application for a permit by 2009. So in September of 2009, the city council voted to make application for permit coverage, as well as develop a comprehensive stormwater management program that we submitted as a packet to EPA. In 2011, the city received a draft individual permit. We went through a lengthy process with the EPA over the course of a couple years. Never really heard anything. There was a lot of action going on at the federal level, a lot of litigation going on. And then in 2015, we received what they call a draft general permit, and they developed a general permit that applied statewide. And so they were trying to develop this general permit where all Phase 2 small communities would be regulated under this program. Again, a lot of things occurred at the federal level. We saw a few iterations of that general permit, and in July of this year, we received notice from EPA that they were going to scrap the general permit, statewide general permit, and focus back on individual permits for the city of Moscow, the city of Lewiston, and a few others. So that's where we're at right now. We received that draft permit last Monday, November 26th. What the draft permit ultimately requires is that we develop, implement, and enforce a comprehensive stormwater management program. And in the Phase 2 regulations that I talked a little bit about earlier, they require the EPA to put in place minimum control measures. And so the draft permit that we have right now that's going out to public comment focuses on these 6 different minimum control measures: public education and outreach, which will require us to develop materials for different audiences. We'll have to have a comprehensive illicit discharge detection and elimination program. And please feel free to ask any questions on any of these. Discharge detection and elimination for illicit discharges usually focuses on like spill response, any kind of illegal dumping, paint. We see that often. Maybe where a sewer is connected to a storm sewer, so you have discharges and stuff like that. So you got to have an active program to detect and eliminate those. Construction and post-construction site runoff control, that's a big one. We have an ordinance in place right now, Title 5, Chapter 15, which deals with peak rate runoff from developments. But we'll be required to beef up our design standards and look at not just peak rate runoff, but the volume of runoff that's coming off of sites. And so we'll have quite a bit of work to do and with that minimum measure. And under all of these minimum control measures, there's a lot of provisions. So it's pretty comprehensive. And then the last one's pollution prevention and good housekeeping. So, training our city staff, looking at how we handle and store materials at all of our facilities, things like that. The permit applies only to the system that's owned or operated by the city of Moscow. The permit will be effective for 5 years, like all other MPDS permits. And like I said, the draft permit went out to public comment last Monday, and it'll be out for 45 days until January 10th. And so, with that,
I got a question for you, Kyle. So with that 5-year permit, so we'd be going through this same process in 2024?
Yeah, likely, yeah.
Well, it could be more standards, different standards at that time, or whatever they come up with. It seems like every time they have one of these, there is a little different set of criteria that go along with it, as I understand.
Yeah, the rules are always changing. Mm-hmm. There's a chance that the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality, I didn't touch on this, but the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality assumed primacy over the MPDS program, which means that they are now administering and issuing MPDS permits in the state of Idaho, or IPDS permits. So it's likely that we'll see one in the 5 years, but they do get administratively extended. So, but for all.
Yeah. So just a quick recap. I mean, the reason that we're here is that there's going to be a lot of activity, and you're going to start seeing a lot to do with storm. With this permitting, there are a lot of things. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about the process that several municipalities around us have gone through and are going through with establishment of utilities and how they're dealing with this. And so, everything from code changes to how we're going to staff and how we're going to approach this will be coming before the city council over the next several months as we work toward this permit becoming active. And so it'll be something that we'll be back and we'll be talking about this frequently.
Gina?
So Kyle, you mentioned that there is a 45-day comment period. Is that public comment?
Correct.
Where can we find what we need to comment on? Is it out on the city's website?
The draft permit is published on a site that's hosted by EPA. And so I can send that link to.
In the Federal Register.
In the Federal Register, yes.
We will be preparing a staff generally, and we comment on these sorts of things when they come out. We had an MPDES permit that was issued for our, at the time, wastewater treatment plant back in 2000, I believe it was. And that permit has been administratively extended for a long period of time.
Okay.
So staff prepares, when the permit comes out, and the permit starts with a a long administrative process where you have agencies and stakeholders who will help develop standards by which the Department of Environmental Quality will make recommendations to EPA. Then they'll issue their draft permit and allow the public and the city, the regulated entity, to be able to comment on that. So what happens is our professional staff goes through that permit, which is a fairly extensive document.
Yeah.
They'll go through that and they'll look at the scientific issues going on. Maybe something like the method of testing for certain pollutants. It may be facets of the education program. It may be background levels of chemicals.
Okay.
So it's a pretty technical document. I know our environmental services group, Kyle's been going through this thing with a fine-tooth comb. We knew it was coming for some time, and they've prepared for it and have been working on it. So we have our draft comments that we typically issue administratively, and we'll send those back to EPA. If the public has comments on it, they're certainly welcome to make comments on it. But we want to make sure that whatever regulations, the EPA, whatever limitations are placed upon us, that they're reasonable and we can meet those. And typically in these permits, they're not set up to where, as Tyler indicated, and you've heard us talk about bringing forward a stormwater utility at some point. We need to have some way in order to pay for these sorts of improvements to the system. So when the permit gets issued, we will have a schedule within that permit that says you will achieve certain limitations, whatever the permit contains. You'll meet those limitations within a certain period of time. For instance, one of the things we're looking at phase 5 of our water reclamation and reuse facility at this point on the temperature of the effluent going into Paradise Creek. That was an original limitation in that permit that was issued in the late 1990s. We have not yet achieved that. There are reasons for that, but we have worked with EPA and DEQ throughout the process in order to identify ways to get as close to that permit, even so far as looking at the levels in the permit and saying, are those in fact appropriate? Can we achieve those? So those are the kinds of technical things that go on. So we will have some time, and we knew this back, I believe it was 2007 or 2008. The city made a response to when we were named I hate to use the term, but a community of interest by the EPA as a small MS4, meaning we were less than 50,000, and the EPA said, okay, we want to take a look at you. It took a couple of years, and then they said, yeah, we think we're going to regulate. We came up with and brought it to City Council, a draft plan at that time. So we've known this has been coming. It was just a matter of our Department of Environmental Quality working with EPA, as Kyle indicated. The Department of Environmental Quality, the state of Idaho, will be taking primacy in this area. We were led to believe that there would be a general NPDES permit issued to all small MS4s in the state of Idaho. Then, within the past 6 months, we were told, uh-oh, we're going back to what we originally said we were going to do. And I believe there are 5 small MS4s that are being regulated at this time, a couple of highway districts in southern Idaho, and then some cities. The city of Moscow has always been kind of at the bleeding edge or leading edge of this sort of regulation. We had the first NPDES permit for Paradise Creek, TMDL issued for Paradise Creek back in the 1990s. So there's a lot of interest in what the city of Moscow does, and with an environmentally sensitive creek. So this is just a way to update you as to what's going on. This has been going on so long. We have new council members that haven't been briefed on this before. We will be coming back to you over the next several meetings with different facets of this. And the city attorney and I have been working, trying to we've got a stormwater consultant we have retained and we're continuing to work with. Council approved that contract, I believe, a little over a year ago. We're continuing to develop some standards. And when we get that information developed, then we will be working with the city attorney's office to develop a stormwater utility that has been successfully utilized in Coeur d'Alene, I know the city of Lewiston is looking at doing that, and there's some places in southern Idaho that have done that as well. So it's allowed by state law, so we will be bringing that back to you, and so this is just an educational session for you.
If I could just mention, so the next thing you're likely to see from us, as Gary mentioned, will be, we're wrapping up the first phase with our consultant of the stormwater utility study. And so the next thing you're likely to see is a scope and budget for the second phase, which will get us to the point where we start really working the whole process through council and public outreach and that sort of thing.
By way of process as well, as Kyle and his group is developing those comments to the draft permit, we will look at those in administration, get those ready to go, and then they'll be submitted to the mayor for his signature and submittal to the EPA. So you will be seeing a copy of that as well.
Awesome.
And it'll be a very technical document.
I have one question.
Brandy?
So all those sort of conditions that you need to generate, how you're going to approach each one of those things, like the education and the construction runoff?
In part. So what happens is that there are certain what are called BMPs, best management practices, that we just have to follow. They're established best management practices. There are, as Gary indicated, there are aspects of this that there is kind of a give and take and negotiation process. For example, like you could have an issue with detention versus retention. If you have like a lot of clay layers and the water won't infiltrate the way it will in some places, there can be differences with those sorts of things. And so there are aspects of that, which is some of what Kyle will be addressing in our response to the technical document, where we say, you know what, this isn't feasible given our system. For us to accomplish this goal, it's better for us to do it like this. Or, you know, given our demographics, our public involvement needs to, or our public education campaign needs to include this instead of this, or this in addition to this. And so it's just that process of taking something that's kind of a machete and using a scalpel to make it fit what we need it to fit. I don't know if that answers your question, Brandy.
I think so. The only thing I'm not clear on, so does the draft permit outline what you're supposed to do in all these things? And then
It does, and
okay.
the draft permit's very consistent with the stormwater management program that we proposed back in 2009.
Awesome. Okay.
But like
you're
Tyler
not-
said,
yeah.
there's a few issues that we'll still need to address, so.
I appreciate your multiple clarifications on my question. I thought that was going to be quite the public reading extravaganza, trying to go through that. So I do appreciate the clarification. Thank you.
Other comments?
200 pages of fun.
Yeah.
Just a point of interest, Kyle, how many outflows do we have from stormwater drains into Paradise Creek? How many different ones do we have? Obviously, we don't collect it all in one place.
Outfalls?
Yeah.
There's probably over 210 that discharge to Paradise Creek.
And so are we currently doing monitoring on chemicals and illicit discharges that might be coming out of those?
Yeah.
All 200 of them?
Yeah, we have. We've done what they call dry weather outfall screening. And so we've actually walked all of Paradise Creek during the dry months when they shouldn't be flowing, and looking at evaluating those, so.
And we have done some water quality monitoring on Paradise Creek as well, but that all will increase through this process.
Thank you.
Other questions for Kyle or Tyler? Thank you for the presentation, good presentation, and keep us informed. Thank you, Kyle. Okay, that's the end of our regular agenda, so we'll go on to reports, and now we'll start with Catherine.
Well, Farmers Market lacked a quorum, unfortunately, this last meeting, so that will be happening next. There's nothing to report for that one.
Okay. Art?
Well, there was no URA. Parks and Rec got canceled, but they're meeting again this Thursday to consider the Parks and Rec master plan, which is pretty much finished, and so if they say yay, we'll be seeing it here soon after. Also, the Building Code Advisory Committee met, and they considered building codes for tiny houses, which follows right into our affordable housing issues. And they came down with a basic floor plan maximum of 400 square feet with a 200 square foot loft. And so with that, we'll be seeing that for approval, and then it'll be putting planning and zoning into the hot seat to do some rewriting of the zoning code to facilitate establishment of tiny home areas, communities, whatever. So, so there's some action already happening in that area.
Good.
And so that's what I had.
Ann?
SMART met last week, and one point of discussion that I wanted to bring back to the council is that because it's a board position as opposed to a liaison position, there was some questions about potentially extending that in terms of 1 year versus having to be longer, just for those different kinds of commitments. And then Gina and I actually participated in a marketing discussion talking about better marketing that service to try to increase ridership, which I'm hoping we can implement some strategies for that. And then planning and zoning met as well last week, and one of the big topics of discussion was all of the public comments that have been submitted on the updates to the comprehensive plan. So there were quite a few. I know they'll be included in the packet when we review that, but I'm wondering if everyone might want to see them beforehand as well, just so you have additional time to read those. Yeah,
Good idea.
I'll forward those along.
Thank you, Ann. Gina?
I have nothing to report this time, sir.
Okay. Were you okay too? We went right by.
I don't know, I thought I had my time already tonight, I'm good.
You gave your report tonight.
My one and only report will come next time because my one meeting starts tomorrow. So the tree commission meets tomorrow, and I'll try not to get in front of Jim.
Very good. Brandy?
All right, so I had historic preservation, and it's kind of exciting because they've been working on these series of the interpreted signage, and I think everyone knows that the 1912 center is completed. That's expected to be hopefully installed in January, just a little bit weather dependent for the concrete. But now they had, the City Hall one is going to be next, and so we got to take a look at the first kind of draft and a large size of that, and it's looking really great. Hoping that that will be installed in the spring to the east of the entrance, so right between like the stairs and the covered bike parking where there's that little patch of grass. So, and that was, I learned a lot of the history of this building that I didn't know, so I think that will be really neat. And then the library will be next, but that's off in the future a little bit. So they're moving along with that project.
Nice, very good, Brandon. Well, for me, we had a MIAC meeting last Monday in here on the 26th of November, which was a really good meeting. These kids are kind of feeling their way through things, and it's kind of exciting. I really like it. We're learning more, and we've got a new applicant, and I've got another one on the way as well besides that. So it's kind of an exciting thing, and we're chipping away on it. And with MIAC, I am also on AIC's Mayor's Youth Task Force. We had a meeting on that today and talked about this very thing, so how we can help get other communities more involved. And they were looking for somebody to speak in a leadership role for the youth advisory down in AIC in June, and I volunteered for that because I love talking to kids anyway and giving them a leadership role and different things. So we'll see how that turns out. We had an airport board meeting on the 28th. Hammered out the usual things. Nothing really new with that other than we're talking now about a terminal, so we'll just see how that goes over the process. And that will be a process over, I'm guessing, 2 to 5 years or 2 to 4 years, something like that. And I had an AIC board meeting in Boise on November 29th. We covered a ton of legislative stuff that's going to be coming up for us this winter when we have our legislative tour in January, latter part of January, so I'm kind of excited about that, what we're going for. And just for your information, there was 30 new representatives in the state that were elected, so it kind of changed the dynamics of things. And one example is Scott Becky, who has been a majority leader for a long time. He has been challenged by another person. That's going to be kind of interesting. And also majority Mike Moyel. Yes, somebody's challenging that guy, so I think that's very good. And so maybe, and of course we're going to have a new governor, so I'm kind of excited about things, and maybe we can kind of get things tilted a little bit on its axis so that we can get some things really accomplished and move the state forward. That's kind of exciting. So we'll see what happens. Oh, one of the fun things, November 30th, we had our holiday tree lighting parade downtown, and that was an absolute blast. And there was a lot of people down for that, and that was a very fun night. And it's one of the funnest things to see kids. Kids get so excited about stuff like that. And Santa, opened the door to Santa at Gritman on at 4 o'clock that day, and these kids were just so excited to see him. It was just a wonderful thing, and it's pretty neat. And then on December 1st, we had a fireman's ball at the Best Western. Gary and I attended that, and that's always a fun event as well, and seeing and what's kind of exciting about that is young men and women that are involved in that, as that progresses through, and I've been able to see that over my 40-plus years here. It's a pretty neat thing. Our volunteer fire department, this is part of the start of their fundraising. Very important to this community, and they've got a legacy, and it's one of the fun things to be able to brag a little bit about in the state, because I don't know how many different cities ask me, mayors and councilors, about how do you guys do it, and it's a culture is what it is. It's pretty neat for over 125 years. With that, I don't have anything else. Gary, do you have anything for us?
Yes, sir. We have the monthly breakfast meeting this Wednesday at 7 o'clock at the Hub, at the Wallace Complex. And then on December 13th, we have our annual holiday employee potluck. Council is invited. In fact, I hear there's an ugly sweater contest that they're looking for judges. So if any of you would like to be judges for that, feel free to contact me after the meeting.
Okay.
With that, I have nothing further.
Okay, thank you. Well, with that, I would seek a motion to adjourn to executive session per Idaho Code 74-206, 1C and 1F. And at the end of that, this meeting will not reconvene.
So moved.
Seconded.
Okay, a motion by Jim and a second by Art. I'll start the roll with Ann.
Aye.
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 Okay, good enough. This meeting is over with, and we will go in executive session.